movies you watch once and forget the following week. And there are movies that stick to you, that live in your head for years, that you can never completely erase from your memory. Coraline is of this second type. Not because it is beautiful, and it is, in a way, few animated films have ever been, but because it does something most children's animations never dare. It truly scares you, while speaking about something deeply human. But before talking about what the movie does to the viewer, something must be said about how it was made. Because the story behind the cameras of Coraline is almost as impressive as the story that appears on the screen. There are 207,336 different facial expressions possible for the main character. 207,336. This number is not an exaggeration or marketing, it is what appears in the official exhibit at the Museum of Pop Culture in Seattle, dedicated to the films of the Laker studio. Each of these expressions was created digitally, 3D printed, and assembled by hand on the protagonist's puppet faces. Think about that for a second. For you to see Coraline frown, arch an eyebrow, or smile with suspicion, someone swapped a piece of the puppet's face by hand, adjusted the framing, captured the frame, and did it all again for the next millimeter of movement. The film took 4 years to complete. 4 years of work inside a 140,000 square foot warehouse, the equivalent of more than 13,000 square meters located in Hillsboro, Oregon. At the peak of production, 450 people were involved at the same time, with more than 30 animators. Working in parallel, each team producing between 90 and 100 seconds of finished animation per week. 90 seconds per week. For those who don't know, in conventional filming with real actors, a crew can record several scenes in a single day. In stop motion, every second that appears on the screen represents hours sometimes. Days of meticulous manual work. There were 28 identical Coraline puppets spread across the set. Each of them took between 3 and 4 months to be built and required the work of 10 people. They weren't cheap copies. They were works of the highest level of craftsmanship, with articulated internal structures, clothed hand-sewn with needles the size of a hair strand, and interchangeable faces to allow for the expressiveness you see on the screen. This is all before saying a single word about the director, Henry. Selick entered this project with a reputation built on 2 of the most iconic animation films of the 90s. It was he who directed The Nightmare Before Christmas in 1993. The film people erroneously credit to Tim Burton, who was the producer, not the director. And it was also Selick who brought James and the Giant Peach to the screen in 1996. 2 distinct films. 2 completely different visual worlds, but with the same signature. The stop-motion technique used not as a limitation, but as a deliberate, artistic instrument, capable of creating atmospheres that no other technique can replicate. When Selick met Neil Gaiman, the English author was finishing writing the novella Coraline. Gaiman was a fan of Selick's work, especially The Nightmare Before Christmas, and immediately thought he would be the right person to bring his most disturbing story to life. Selick read the novella and was fascinated, but he also noticed a practical problem. A direct and faithful adaptation would result in a film of perhaps 47 minutes, not a feature. A story that needed to grow, breathe, gain dimension. So he started working on the script, and the story changed. It wasn't destroyed or betrayed, it was expanded. Characters gained more depth. A new character was created from scratch. The setting was relocated. The story became richer. And even so, the dark and disturbing essence that makes Coraline something so unique was preserved with surgical precision. What makes this process even more impressive is the fact that no major Hollywood studio wanted to touch this project. None. When Gaiman and lead animator Travis Knight went to meetings to present the film, the answer was always some variation of the same argument. First, stop motion doesn't sell anymore. It was an era dominated by computer animation. Shrek had just exploded at the box office. Finding Nemo was making history. And the visual language of children's animation had shifted completely to CGI. Stop motion seemed antiquated, risky, commercially unviable. Second, the protagonist was a girl. The market's absurd logic said that boys wouldn't see a movie with a female protagonist. Third, the story was too scary. Girls didn't want to see horror movies. 3 arguments. All wrong. Focus features. The branch of Universal specializing in more auteur and less conventional projects was the only one that said yes. And even within the production process, there was resistance. Producer Bill Mechanic, according to himself, initially assumed the film would be made in live action with real actors. When Selick said he wanted to do it in stop motion, Mechanic called the technique outdated and suggested that at least half the film be executed with CGI. Selick didn't yield. He insisted. He demonstrated the visual potential of the technique. And, eventually, convinced Mechanic that stop motion wasn't the wrong format. It was the only right format for this specific project. And there is the heart of the matter. Coraline works as well as it does, largely because it is stop motion, not despite it. Because of it, there is something intrinsically strange about a puppet animated frame by frame. There is a visual strangeness that no computer can manufacture. In the same way, almost tangible quality. A feeling that you are seeing physical objects from the real world move in ways that shouldn't be possible. It is what aesthetic scholars call the uncanny valley, the strange valley, where something looks almost human, but not quite. And for a movie that talks about a world that looks perfect but hides something rotten underneath, there is no more powerful narrative tool than that. Cell understood this instinctively. Coraline's real world with its faded colors, its distracted adults, its gray and numbing daily life was built on the set with the objects purposely compressed, too close to each other, creating a subconscious feeling of claustrophobia. Meanwhile, the other world, the fantastic universe where everything seems better, was built with the elements more spaced out, more open, specifically designed so that the film's 3D effect created a sense of depth, beauty, and room to breathe. This is because Coraline was the first stop-motion movie in history to be filmed natively in 3D, not a conversion made in post-production, as happened with The Nightmare Before Christmas when it was re-released in theaters. Native 3D stop-motion, with each frame captured from 2 slightly different angles to create the illusion of real depth. This doubled the technical difficulty of each scene. And Selick not only accepted this challenge, he used it as a narrative tool, where the 3D deepened the contrast between the 2 worlds and reinforced the fatal seduction of the other world. For years to build this film by hand, frame by frame, puppet by puppet, expression by expression. In a warehouse in Oregon, far from the glamour of big Hollywood productions, a team of 450 people did something the market said was impossible and the public proved to be unforgettable. And all this started with a novella, a story of a discontented girl, a secret door, and a world that promises everything you ever wanted provided you accept one small detail. A detail that fits in the eyes. Literally. Neil Gaiman didn't write Coraline to scare children. He wrote it for his own daughter. It was the early 90s. Gaiman was living in Menominee Falls, Wisconsin, and had a young daughter named Holly who loved hearing stories before bed. One night, he started making up a story about a girl who finds a secret door in her house. He didn't plan it. He didn't outline it. The story just started to grow, as Gaiman's stories usually grow from an image. A feeling, a question no one had asked out loud yet. The question was this: what happens when the place that should be your refuge, your family, your home, the people who should love you unconditionally can't give you what you need? What if there were a place that could? What if that place were perfect? And what if the price of that perfection was everything that makes you, you? Gaiman took years, writing the novella intermittently. It was published in 2002 with illustrations by Dave McKean and immediately won the Hugo and Nebula Awards, the most important in English language science fiction and fantasy. It was short, less than 30,000 words. A novella, not a novel. But it had a thematic density and atmospheric tension that most 400-page novels never achieve. What Gaiman did in Coraline was something deceptively simple on the surface and extraordinarily complex underneath. He took the structure of European fairy tale years, the lost child, the alternative magic world, the creature disguised as a protector, and distilled it to the core, without false sentimentality, without a completely comforting ending, without the lesson written in capital letters at the end to ensure the child understood the message. Gaiman trusted the intelligence of young readers in a way that most authors of the genre don't dare. In the book, Coraline is English. She lives in a mansion converted into apartments, an old place, laden with history and moisture. The atmosphere is intrinsically British, cold, somber, reticent. The Coraline of the book is also different in one crucial aspect. She is more aware, more suspicious. When she discovers the other world for the first time, she already feels something is wrong. The seduction is subtler because the protagonist is not so desperately willing to believe. Henry Selick read the novella and understood the heart of the story, but he also understood that a direct and faithful adaptation would result in less than 50 minutes of film. It needed to expand. And here begins one of the most productive and respectful collaborations in the recent history of animated cinema. Gaiman gave Selick total freedom to adapt. The author did not interfere in the script, did not demand blind fidelity, did not place restrictions on what could change. Gaiman knew something that many adapted authors cannot accept. A movie is not a book. They are different languages. What works on the page doesn't always work on the screen, and what works on the screen frequently doesn't exist on the page. Trying to force one medium to behave like the other is the fastest way to a mediocre adaptation. Selick made significant changes. The first and most evident was the setting, from an English mansion to the Pink Palace apartments in Oregon, USA. This changed the tone in a subtle but real way from a European melancholy to a kind of American suburban loneliness. A place that theoretically should be full of neighbors and community life, but somehow feels isolated, stagnant, ignored. The second change was the creation of a character who doesn't exist in the book. Why Beloved? Why be short for Wybeniz? the grandson of the Pink Palace's owner, a weird kid fascinated by machines, who wears a motorcycle helmet even when he's just walking around. In the book, Coraline doesn't have a peer of the same age. She is fundamentally alone in her journey. Selick created Wybie for a pragmatic and honest reason. In a movie, a character who is alone must have someone to talk to so the audience understands their thoughts. The camera cannot enter a character's mind with the same ease as literary prose. Wybie solves this narrative problem, but Wybie does more than just be a tool for exposition. He becomes a mirror of Coraline's, someone who is also cast aside by adults, who is also on the margins, who also feels that the world wasn't waiting for him. And, crucially, he appears in the third act at a decisive moment that in the book belongs to Coraline alone. This change generated debate among book readers. Some considered it a diminution of the protagonist's agency. Others saw it as a choice. That makes the ending more cinematically dynamic. The third change is subtler. The Coraline of the movie is slightly more naive than the one in the book. In the film, she is genuinely seduced by the other worlds before perceiving the danger. She believes, for a time, that it could be real, that it could last, that it could be an escape. This makes falling into the trap more credible for a younger Pratt audience, and the moment of epiphany more powerful when it finally arrives. And then there is the opening of the movie. A scene that doesn't exist on any page of Gaiman's book. The camera observes pale, long hands, articulated like spider legs, dismantling a rag doll. The hands are deliberate, methodical, unhurried. They remove the old stuffing, sew on new button. Eyes reconstruct the doll with unsettling precision this time, with Coraline's appearance. The scene lasts perhaps 2 minutes. There is no dialogue. There is no dramatic music. And yet, you already know. You already feel it. Before being introduced to any character or context, the film has already installed a feeling in you that something is deeply, irredeemably wrong. It is one of the best prologues in modern animation, and it was invented by Selick, not taken from the book. When the film was presented to Hollywood studios, the rejection was almost universal. Stop motion was old technology. The protagonist was a girl. The story was too scary. We've already briefly discussed these arguments, but it's worth understanding the deeper context. The animation market of 2003, 2004, 2005 was being defined by the crushing success of Pixar and DreamWorks animation with CGI. Shrek had grossed more than $400 million in 2001. Finding Nemo had broken records in 2003. The equation seemed simple. CGI sold. Stop motion hadn't sold in decades. What the executives didn't understand is that Coraline was not trying to compete with Shrek or Nemo. It was trying to be something else entirely. It wasn't a movie to make a child laugh for 90 minutes while parents look at their watches waiting for it to end. It was a movie that wanted to make the child and the adult sitting next to them feel something more complicated than easy happiness. Focused Features was the only one that saw this. It was a studio used to betting on unconventional projects. It had distributed Brokeback Mountain, Lost in Translation, The Pianist. It knew what it was to bet on something the mainstream market didn't want, and it said yes to Coraline. The approved budget was $60 million. For a stop-motion animation, made at a pace of 90 seconds of finished material per week, this required military-level discipline and planning. Silicon Lake Studio had no room for expensive mistakes. Every set, every puppet, every miniature costume needed to work, and then began the 4 years that would transform this 30,000-word British book into one of the most beloved and studied animation films of the 21st century. Gamma Man, when he saw the final result, said the film had captured not just the story, but something he didn't even know was in the story, something that was between the lines, in the space between words, in the tension he had felt while writing but never fully managed to name. For the author, Selick didn't adapt the book. He completed it. This is one of the most extraordinary things an adaptation can do, and it is one of the reasons why it is worth spending the next parts looking at every detail of how this film was built, scene by scene, pixel by pixel, or rather, frame by frame. When you watch Coraline for the first time, it's easy to lose yourself in the story, in the other mother, in the unsettling beauty of the other world, in the unlikely courage of an 11-year-old girl facing something much bigger than herself. It's easy to forget deliberately that nothing you're seeing is real, that every leaf that falls, every drop of rain, every strand of blue hair on the protagonist was positioned by hand by a human being before each photo was taken. And that's exactly what Leica wants to happen. The studio that produced Coraline has a history that begins before the name itself. It all started from a company called Will Vinton Studios, founded in Portland, Oregon, in 1975 by animator Will Vinton, a pioneer of the claymation animation technique animation with clay. Vinton was a visionary, responsible for the iconic animated M&Ms in 90s commercials and for creating the California Raisins character, which was a cultural phenomenon in the US in the 80s. But in the early 2000s, the studio was in serious financial difficulties, and an investor named Phil Knight, the founder of Nike, took majority control of the company. Phil Knight had a son, Travis Knight, who was a stop-motion animator. Travis wasn't an heir who just wanted to use his father's money to play at cinema. He was a dedicated, talented professional who had worked in stop-motion for years and had a clear vision of what the format could become if treated with genuine ambition. In 2005, Will Vinton was removed from the company he founded, and the studio was renamed Laika, in honor of the Soviet dog that was the first living being to orbit the Earth, name that carries. At the same time, the idea of pioneering, of courage, and of something slightly tragic. The new studio's first decision was audacious to the point of seeming insane. Laika's first feature film would not be a safe, tested production with a guaranteed audience. It would be Coraline, a stop-motion film based on a dark fantasy novella for adults adapted for children, which no major studio had wanted to touch. With a budget of $60 million and a director who hadn't released a feature in over a decade, Travis Knight took on the role of lead animator for the film. He personally animated the garden sequence, where the other father grows vegetables that take the shape of Coraline's face, one of the most visually stunning and at the same time most disturbing scenes in the entire film. Plants that grow in spirals, flowers that open, revealing a child's familiar smile, all in fluid and precise movement. That scene alone took weeks. The physical scale of the project was something unprecedented in the history of stop motion. 150 miniature sets, distributed across 52 different stages, inside the 140,000 square foot warehouse in Hillsborough. The sets were works of craftsmanship on an industrial scale, miniatures that were actually huge compared to the puppets, but that needed to look completely real when filmed close up. furniture built with real wood, miniature books with pages that could be turned, food manufactured from clay and resin that looked fresh out of a real kitchen, a patchwork. Quilting Coraline's room with hundreds of small squares of fabric hand-sewn. And then there are the clothes. Althea Crome is a craftswoman specializing in micro-knitting, the art of knitting with needles the size of a human hair. She was hired to create Coraline's sweaters and coats. Each piece took weeks to be made. The needles used were between 0.15 and 0.25 millimeters thick, thinner than most strands of hair. Coraline's sweater pattern, with its colorful diamonds, was all hand-knitted by Crome, stitch by stitch. You can pause at any frame of the film where Coraline's clothing appears in close-up and see every individual stitch, because they exist, because they were made by a real person, with real hands, over weeks of work. This is what separates Leica from any other animation studio in the world. It's not just the technique, it's the philosophy. The conviction that craftsmanship itself communicates something that the viewer, even without consciously knowing they're seeing real physical objects, feels the difference on some subconscious level. That the texture of clay, the weight of a real fabric, the millimeter imperfection of a hand-painted surface are perceived by the eye and processed by the brain as authenticity. But the most revolutionary, technical innovation of Coraline was not the physical craftsmanship. It was what happened on the puppets' faces. LAIKAS, Digital Design Group, developed an entirely new system to solve an old stop-motion problem. In traditional animations, the puppets' facial expressions were created with multiple interchangeable physical pieces, different mouths, different eyebrows, different cheek switch. The animators swapped frame by frame. It was a limited process because every possible expression needed to be sculpted in advance. If you hadn't made the mouth with that specific smile angle before you started filming, you couldn't use it. Leica's solution was to 3D print the expressions. The studio invested in high-resolution 3D printers when the technology was still experimental, expensive and accessible to very few companies in the world. They developed a system where every facial expression of every character was designed, digitally approved, and then printed in resin on a tiny scale with a precision resolution that allowed for details impossible to sculpt by hand. Afterward, the pieces were painted and finished manually by artists. The result was something never seen before in stop motion. Truly cinematic facial expressiveness. Look at Coraline's face when she first sees the other world illuminated. That mix of disbelief, delight, and the slightest shadow of caution that you almost don't notice that wouldn't be possible with the old method. The 3D printing system allowed for composite, subtle expressions with gradations that simply didn't exist before in this format. For the protagonist, Coraline alone, more than 207,000 combinations of possible facial expressions were created and stored. The other mother had her own set of expressions, more exaggerated, more theatrical, designed to create that particular feeling of something that imitates humanity without actually being human. The cat had different expressions for its strange and perceptive ways of being. Each character had a facial vocabulary built specifically for their personality. And then there was the issue of 3D. Coraline was the first stop-motion film in history to be filmed natively in stereoscopy, what we called true 3D at the time. Not a post-production conversion, not a digital simulation. Each scene was photographed twice, from slightly different angles, to create the illusion of real depth when projected in theaters equipped with 3D technology. Henry Selick used this, not as an entertainment trick, but as a tool of cinematographic language. In Coraline's real world, the grey, numbing, a neglected world of the Pink Palace, the sets were built in a deliberately compressed way. Objects are close to each other, the space seems small, the adults visually dominate each room just by proportion. In 3D, this world looks flattened, almost two-dimensional, as if nothing has real depth. The other world was built oppositely. The sets are open, the decorative elements are arranged in layers that extend far from the camera, creating a visual depth that in 3D seemed almost physical, as if you could reach into the screen and touch the flowers in the other mother's garden. The beauty of the other world literally looks more real than reality, more three-dimensional, more present, more alive. This is high-level visual storytelling. The 3D is not there to impress. It's there to make you feel, instinctively and without needing to think about it, what Coraline feels when she enters the other world for the first time. The sensation that that is more real than what you left behind. It took 18 months of principal photography to complete the project. 18 months of animators huddling over miniature sets, moving puppets, fractions of a millimeter each frame, swapping facial expressions with tweezers, adjusting lighting, checking continuity. On a single good day, an animator could complete 4 to 5 seconds of finished animation. When the film finally hit theaters in February 2009, the audience that entered the theaters had no way of fully knowing what it had cost to make those 100 minutes appear on the screen. It's not the kind of thing that appears in trailers, but on some level, somewhere between the eyes and the hearts, many people felt it. And that's why even those who know nothing about stop motion or Leica leave Coraline with the feeling of having seen something made with genuine care, with love for the form, with respect for the viewer, because it was. The movie starts with rain, not a dramatic, cinematic rain, the kind that announces tragedy or grandeur, a fine, numbing rain, the kind that makes the day feel like it hasn't even properly started. And inside a car, crossing a wet Oregon road, sitting in the back seat, with her gaze lost out the window, is Coraline Jones. She is 11 years old. Blue hair, not a deliberate aesthetic choice, but because that's who she is. A girl who doesn't ask permission to be different in a world that would rather she be invisible. She wears yellow gloves, an orange hooded jacket, boots that seem to have traveled through places more interesting than this one. Coraline Jones looks like someone who is always arriving from somewhere else, wanting to go to one dot. And that is exactly the problem. The Jones family has just moved to the Pink Palace Apartments, an old and somewhat dilapidated house in rural Oregon that has been divided into apartments. The name Pink Palace is almost a joke. The place is nothing like a palace, and the pink color it once had clearly belongs to a distant past. The paint is peeling. The walls are damp. The garden has been taken over by upturned earth, and the disorder of someone who has just unpacked boxes and hasn't yet decided where to put their life. Mel Jones, Coraline's mother, is a writer-or trying to be. She works at a computer constantly, pressed by deadlines, replying to emails, producing a gardening guide with an urgency that leaves room for little else. Charlie Jones, the father, also works at the computer, also has deadlines, also is always in a state of, in a bit, my love. The two love each other, the film doesn't suggest otherwise. But they are inside their own heads, inside their own pressures. And Coraline, at that specific moment of transition and loneliness that comes with moving to a new city and school, is on the outside of all that. This is the emotional starting point of the film, and it is portrayed with a precision that hurts. A bit. It's not abuse. It's not severe neglect. It's something more common and therefore more universal. It's being ignored by people who love you but who, at the moment, can't see you. It's the specific loneliness of being physically present in a house with other people, and yet feeling like you have no place there. Any person who has been a child everyone recognizes this feeling from somewhere. Dakota Fanning voiced Coraline, and the choice is perfect in a way that only becomes clear in retrospect. Fanning was 13 when she recorded the role, and she brings a quality that most adult actors couldn't reproduce artificially: genuine childhood impatience. She's not a cute child the audience wants to protect. She's a child with firm opinions, with real frustration, with a voice that has a tendency to go up half a tone when she wants something and isn't getting it. Coraline complains. She demands. She interrogates adults with the disconcerting lack of filter that only children have. "Why didn't you have tasty things for dinner?" she asks her mother after a bland dish. It's not a cruel question. It's the question of someone who hasn't yet learnt that certain truths shouldn't be said out loud. And the mother, tired, pressed, cranky with a deadline, answers in a way that technically isn't wrong, but that closes a door, a small, almost invisible door, but a door nonetheless. The Pink Palace has other residents. Downstairs live, Mrs. Spink and Forcible, two former theatre actresses who now spend their days between lattes and their many fat and idolized Scotty dogs. They are eccentric, a bit deaf, kind in that inconsequential way of those who don't quite perceive what's going on around them. Upstairs lives Mr. Babinski in Russian. The full name in the book is Sergei Alexander Babinskaya, tall man with a huge mustache, vaguely bluish skin, a dense Slavic accent, and the absolutely serious claim that he is training a circus of jumping mice. No one believes him. Coraline almost believes him. And then there's YB Viben. Love it, the grandson of the Pink Palace owner, a boy with tortoiseshell glasses, a motorcycle helmet even when he's not on a bike, and an old bicycle he uses to explore the surroundings with the familiarity of someone who knows every stone on the path. YB appears and disappears, asks strange questions, and on an especially grey afternoon, hands Coraline a doll he found inside a box of his grandmother's old luggage. The doll is identical to Coraline. Same height, same blue hair, same clothes. The eyes are black and shiny buttons. Coraline finds it strange but keeps it anyway, and puts it on the bed pillow while covering both sides of everything that is wrong with her new life. The muddy garden she didn't ask to explore, the crazy neighbors no one asked for, the cold room that still has nothing of hers on the walls. That night, while her parents work, Coraline explores the house, and she finds something. In the living room, behind a wallpaper with pale flowers, there is a small wooden door. A door too low for an adult to use without bending, with a porcelain knob painted bone color. Coraline asks her mother for the key there. Is a key hanging on a nearby nail, ornate, of black metal, and the mother, distracted but not cruel, agrees to open it. The door is walled up. On the other side, bricks. The mother explains that when the house was divided into apartments, many of the original passages were blocked. There's nothing there. It was the connection between two floors that are now separate dwellings. The key is put back on the nail. The conversation ends. Coraline goes to sleep frustrated, but that night, she wakes up. A group of tiny mice crosses the room in single file, as if calling her. Coraline follows them with that determination of a child who hasn't yet learnt that following mice at midnight inside an unfamiliar house might not be the most sensible decision. The mice lead to the small door in the living room, and when Coraline opens it with the key that now seems to have returned to the nail on its own, she doesn't find bricks. She finds a tunnel. The tunnel is dark, long, and seems made of something organic, not masonry, but something that pulses slightly, that has a cocoon texture. It's narrow enough that she has to crawl. It's long enough that the darkness is complete before the end. And at the end, there is light, and the light is warm. And the house on the other side is just like hers, but different. The paint is fresh. The flowers on the wallpaper seem to move. The kitchen smells like something extraordinary. And around the stove, with her back turned, is a woman who, when she turns around, has Coraline's mother's face. The same face, but with black buttons instead of eyes. Here is where the film does something few fantasy movies manage. It doesn't present the other world as obviously threatening. The other mother smiles. The food she served is delicious. It's exactly what Coraline had asked for dinner earlier, made with care and visible love. The other father is sitting at the table, ready to have dinner together, more present and more attentive than the real father had been in weeks. The apartment is warm, colourful, full of life. And on this first visit, Coraline still doesn't feel the danger. She feels relief. She feels, and this is what makes the movie so perceptive, exactly what any child who has felt ignored would feel if they suddenly found a place where all their wishes are anticipated, where everyone sees them, where they are the center of the universe. The problem is that every center of the universe has gravity, and once you are too close, leaving starts to require an effort that maybe you can't make. Coraline goes back to bed before dawn. She wakes up in her real room. She thinks she dreamed, but she didn't dream. On the second visit, everything is even. Better duck, because that's how traps work. Not all at once. Gradually, with patience, with every detail carefully calibrated to make you want more, to make the real world seem smaller, paler, more unsatisfactory with every comparison. Coraline crosses the tunnel again, and the other world welcomes her with a generosity that seems supernatural, because it is. The garden that in the real world is mud and chaos is here in full bloom, an explosion of colors that the film's production designer, Boo Henry, built as the deliberate visual opposite of the grey world Coraline inhabits, where the real world is dominated by cold blues, faded greys, and listless olive greens. The other world explodes in deep purples, vibrant reds, electric yellows, oranges that seem to emit their own light. It's like moving from an old photograph to a cinema screen in full resolution. And it's not just the color, it's the scale. It's the sense of space that the real world lacks. The garden extends beyond what should be possible. The flowers are the size of plates. The butterflies are large enough to carry weight. Everything seems designed specifically for an 11-year-old child, as if the whole world had been resized so that she would finally be the right size. The other mother is there, in an apron, with her hair neat, with that smile that is too wide. To be completely human, but that Coraline still cannot name as wrong. She serves breakfast pancakes, fruits, fresh juice. The other father arrives singing, cheerful, present in a way the real father can't be while he has deadlines and spreadsheets. He plays a piano that didn't exist in the real house, and the keys produce notes that seem specifically composed for that moment, that morning, that specific child sitting in that specific chair. It's a scene of nearly perfect domestic bliss, almost because you see the eyes, the buttons, black and shiny, without pupil, without white, without the imperceptible mobility that real eyes have when a person is alive and thinking. They are eyes that reflect light but don't absorb it. They are eyes that look at you without seeing you, or that see you in a way that is not a mother's gaze. Selleck makes an extraordinary visual decision here. He doesn't push the buttons to the center of the scene. He doesn't use dramatic close-ups with suspense music to tell you this is scary. He leaves them there, visible but not shouted, integrated into the other mother's face with a disturbing naturalness. It's the adult viewer who feels the chill. The child inside the screen and maybe the child in the audience hasn't decided yet whether to feel fear or not. The other residents of the other Pink Palace are equally fascinating. The other Mr. Babinski is not just an eccentric man with a mouse circus. In the other world, he has a real circus, complete show, with mice jumping in perfect synchronization, impossible acrobatics, lights, music. He is tall, blue, glorious. Coraline laughs genuinely for the first time in the whole movie during this scene. And you laugh with her because it's charming, because it's exactly the kind of thing an imaginative child would wish to find upstairs. The other misses, Spink and Forcible, are not two old and tired ladies surrounded by fat dogs. They are young, athletic stars of a dazzling water theatre show, with ornate costumes and impeccable competence in their trapeze and diving numbers. In the real world, they tried to read Coraline's fortune with tea leaves and saw something that disturbed them. Warning they didn't know how to articulate clearly. In the other world, there are no warnings. There is only the spectacle, and Webby appears to a version of the other Webby, but different in a way that initially seems gentle. The other Webby doesn't speak. The other mother explains, with that too wide smile, that she'd had his mouth sewn shut because he talked too much. Coraline laughs. She thinks it's a joke. The other YB smiles with her a sewn, literal, fixed smile. It's not a joke. Coraline returns to the real world again. And here the film begins to operate on two layers simultaneously. On the surface, it's the story of a girl discovering a magical world. Underneath, it's a precise portrait of how the fantasy of escapism works psychologically. Every time you return from escape to reality, reality looks a bit worse than before. A bit colder. A bit harsher. The contrast amplifies with each trip, and the temptation to just stay on the other side grows in a proportion that starts to seem reasonable. On the third visit, the other mother takes her to the garden at night, and the garden at night is different. From the garden by Dakota, more mysterious, but still beautiful. The flowers glow. The constellations in the sky have been arranged in the shape of Coraline's face. The whole garden, the other mother reveals, with the pleasure of someone offering a carefully wrapped gift, was made for her. Every detail, every flower, every star, thinking of her. And then comes the proposal. The other mother, sitting with Coraline in the garden, explains with a kindness that is soft and yet non-negotiable. Coraline can stay. She can live in this world forever. She can have this mother and this father and these neighbors and this garden. She can have all this. But to stay, there is a condition, a single condition. She needs to sew buttons into her eyes and hear out. This exact moment the movie flips upside down, because until that point, Coraline was being seduced. And a small part of the viewer, that part that has also felt ignored and wanted a better place, was being seduced along with her. The button proposal is the moment the mask cracks for the first time. Not completely. The other mother still smiles, still uses that gentle voice, still frames it as a gift. But the nature of the gift has changed. A gift with a condition is not a gift. It's a purchase. Coraline asks for time to think. She returns to the real world, and the real world, for the first time, looks different to her, no longer just cold and neglected, but something she understands she can lose. The real mother, distracted and impatient, suddenly has a value that didn't exist before, precisely because now there is an alternative that requires her to be exchanged. In this dynamic lies the philosophical core of the entire film, but it's not yet time to discuss that. What matters now is what happens next, because while Coraline is awake in the real world, still undecided, still processing the button proposal, something changes in the other world. A message arrives not through words, but through an image. The doll identical to Coraline that Wybie had given at the beginning, the one with black and shiny buttons, is different. The clothes have changed. The position has changed. It's as if it's communicating. And when Coraline pays attention, she realizes the doll is not just a doll. It's an instrument, a spy, a surveillance camera made of cloth and buttons that the other mother used to watch Coraline in the real world from the first day, learning her tastes, her desires, her weaknesses, everything she needed to know to build a world perfectly calibrated to capture her. The garden was not made for Coraline because the other mother loves her. It was made for Coraline because the other mother studied her. The difference between these two things is the difference between being loved and being hunted. And then Coraline does something that looks small but is huge. She chooses not to go back. She chooses the imperfect world, the distracted parents, the muddy garden, the cold room. She chooses reality with all its flaws and disappointments, because reality, unlike the other world, has no cost. But this choice comes too late, because when she wakes up the next day and goes down for breakfast, her parents aren't there. The real apartment is empty, cold, and in the window, trapped inside a small and cruel snow globe, are the faces of Mel and Charlie Jones looking at her from inside the glass, unable to speak. The other mother didn't wait. She took what she wanted before Coraline could say no, and now Coraline is alone on the wrong side of the door, with her parents trapped in another world, and a creature that is no one's mother, waiting on the other side of the tunnel with a pair of buttons in its hand. The game just changed completely. There is a word in English that Neil Gaiman used to name the other mother in the original book: beldam. It's an old word of medieval French origin, meaning literally grandmother, but which, over the centuries, was transformed by popular use into a synonym for old witch. A disguised creature, something that uses the form of a caregiver to hide. Something that is not caring at all. The beldam is exactly that. She is not an alternative mother with flaws and excesses. She is not a chaotic entity that simply causes random damage. She is a predator, ancient, patient, calculated. Selleck and Gaiman make this clear not through a villainous monologue explaining her plans. The film is more sophisticated than that, but through the full accumulation of details that in retrospect reveal the structure of a carefully planned hunt. The spy dial was sent before Coraline arrived at the Pink Palace. This means the beldam knew a family with a daughter was coming, that she prepared herself, that she built a specific disguise for that specific child, with those specific tastes, at that specific moment of vulnerability. The perfect food, the flowers with her face in the constellations, the mouse circus, the water shone on of it was improvised. It was researched, calibrated, served at the right temperature and dose dot, and she had done it before. This is what the ghost children reveal. When Coraline enters the other world, after discovering her parents were captured, the place is different. The transformation is gradual but implacably as if the mask no longer needs to exist now that the trap is closed. Colors begin to lose saturation at the edges. Flowers wither slightly. The garden that seemed alive begins to reveal that it never was exactly alive, was a performance. And the performance was being maintained by the effort of seduction. And that effort is now directed toward another goal. The beldam continues to smile. She remains gentle on the surface, but there is a different quality to the gentleness, less warm, more mechanical, like a musician playing a piece they know by heart and no longer need to feel to execute. The buttons in her eyes look deeper. Her fingers, when they move, have a knee-like articulation that goes at an angle. Human fingers don't go. And then Coraline finds the ghost children. There are 3. 2 girls and a boy, translucent figures, almost colorless, who inhabit the dark. Spaces of the other world, like memories that can't completely fade. They were the beldam's previous victims. Children who also found the small door, who also crossed the tunnel, who also were seduced by a world made especially for them, and who in the end accepted the buttons. What happens after the buttons is what the film shows only indirectly, with a delicacy that in my view is more disturbing than anything explicit could be. The beldam doesn't just capture the children. She consumes their essence, the soul, whatever it is that makes a person and leaves them trapped in the dark of a limbo between the 2 worlds. Neither alive nor completely dead, waiting indefinitely without a natural end. The children's eyes were hidden. The beldam removed the gemstone eyes because in the other world, the children's eyes turned into gems after the buttons and hid them in 3 different locations across the other world. As long as the eyes are hidden, the children cannot leave. They stay trapped in limbo. It is here that Coraline proposes a game. It's an extraordinary decision for a protagonist of a children's animation film to make. Not an escape, not a frontal attack. A game with rules established by herself, offered to the beldam as a formal challenge. If Coraline finds the hidden eyes of the 3 children and still finds her parents trapped inside the snow globe ball, there's within the other world. Before the other world becomes completely inhospitable, the beldam must release everyone and let her go free. If the beldam wins, Coraline stays forever. With the buttons, the beldam accepts, because she is arrogant in the specific way that very old and very successful creatures tend to be arrogant, with the certainty of someone who has never lost before and therefore cannot genuinely imagine the possibility of losing now. But before setting off on the search, Coraline receives help from an unlikely source, the cat, throughout the movie. The cat is the most enigmatic and at the same time the most honest character. In the real world, it's just a black cat that appears once in a while around the Pink Palace, vaguely belonging to Wybie, but in truth belonging to no one, as cats generally insist on being. In the other world, it is different from all other inhabitants. It doesn't have an alternative version. It is the same cat on both sides of the door. This in itself is revealing. Everything in the other world is a copy, a performance, a version manufactured by the beldam. Everything except the cat. It crosses the worlds as it wishes, is not affected by the illusion, and in the other world, it has something the other inhabitants lack, the ability to speak. And what it speaks is always the truth, sometimes inconveniently. Sometimes in a way Coraline doesn't want to hear, but always the truth. It is the cat who first tells Coraline, without softening it, that the other mother is not a mother. It is the cat who explains that names have power, and that calling the creature what she truly is, the beldam, is already a form of resistance. And it is the cat who, in a scene the film uses with economic precision, appears at the right moment to tip the scales in one of the most dangerous confrontations of Coraline's quest. Keith David lends his voice to the cat, and the choice is brilliant. That deep, slightly ironic voice, without artificial urgency, it's exactly the voice of a creature that knows more than it says, and says only enough so you reach the right conclusion on your own. It's not a mentor, it's an observer with a personal interest in Coraline's survival that it never openly admits. As Coraline begins her search for the children's eyes, the other world accelerates its deterioration. It's a powerful visual decision. The more the beldam loses control of the situation, the more the world she built crumbles. Flowers dry up and turn black. The sky loses its color gradient and becomes an indifferent white mist. The sets that were built with such richness of detail begin to reveal what is behind the flowers and colors wire, spiderweb threads, darkness. The beldam's world was not a world. It was a setting, a set, built for a single audience, with a single purpose. And now that this audience is no longer behaving as expected, the set is starting to show its cardboard walls. The symbolism of the buttons deserves to be discussed here, as it is one of the richest and most debated of the film. Buttons in the eyes eliminate the most direct window into a person's inner life expressiveness, presence, the ability to make real contact. They are eyes that do not see and do not allow being seen truly. In the context of the beldam, the buttons are the ultimate condition of control. Once you accept them, you give up your identity in exchange for an illusion of belonging. You become a piece of the other world's scenery, not an inhabitant. But the buttons also work on a level closer to the childhood experience. For a child who feels ignored, who feels that adults don't truly see them, the beldam's proposal has a warped and disturbing logic. The price of being completely seen, completely loved, completely the center of a world is to no longer see with your own eyes, to exchange your perspective for approval, to trade who you are for who someone wants you to be. It's no coincidence that Coraline's real parents, despite being distracted and imperfect, Never ask her to be different than she is. The beldam, despite all her performative generosity, wants her with swapped eyes, with buttons. The difference between the two relationships is perhaps the most important thing the film says. The search for the ghost children's eyes begins now. 3 locations, 3 dangers, 3 stories Coraline will need to discover and honor. And at each stage, the other world will be a bit more broken, the beldam a bit less disguised, and Coraline a bit more certain that the only way to save everyone is not to be afraid to look directly at what is there. With her own eyes, the first soul Coraline needs to find belongs to 2 children. The other Mrs. Spink and Forcible were once real children, and their eyes were hidden in the other worlds. Theatre. But the theatre, which on Coraline's second visit had been a glorious spectacle of trapeze and water diving, is now different. Lights are out in parts. The taxidermy dogs that decorated the walls in the real-world version have taken life. Here, in a way that isn't exactly life, they are hybrid forms, half dog, half bat, circling through the dark space with a disorientation of creatures that shouldn't exist. Coraline crosses the theatre. She finds the eyes in a ball of hardened taffy, stuck inside a thing that the other Mrs. Spink and Forcible now fused into a single strange form, wrapped in a cocoon guarding without consciousness, just instinct. She takes the eyes. She escapes. The second soul belongs to the other Mr. Babinski, and his eyes are hidden in the mouse circus, which now, with the other world falling apart, functions without the spectacle. The mice speak. They deliver clues in fragments. The circus is empty, but the mice are restless, like animals that feel an earthquake approaching before any instrument registers it. The eyes are among the circus equipment, and when Coraline finds them, the warehouse roof begins to crack and the floor begins to reveal that beneath it there is nothing, just darkness in all directions. The third soul doesn't have an immediate, physical location. It's the youngest of the 3 ghost children, boy whose name didn't even remain intact after so much time in Limborn. His eyes are hidden in the garden that was made with Coraline's face in the flowers, with her name written. In the constellations, with every detail calculated to seduce her. But the garden is now dead. The flowers are black silhouettes. The constellations are gone. And in the center of the garden, where the most elaborate plants once grew, there is only dry earth and darkness. Coraline digs, with her hands, without stopping, and she finds the eyes. But here the film does something that changes the emotional weight of the scene completely. The boy's eyes are the smallest, the most fragile of the 3 pairs, and when Coraline holds them in the palm of her hand, the ghost child who appears at her side, translucent, almost formless, looks at her with a gratitude that has no words. There is no dialogue. There is no dramatic soundtrack telling you what to feel. There is only that faded figure looking at the child who finally came to fetch it, and something in the size of those tiny eyes communicates decades of waiting in a way that truly tightens the chest. Coraline has the 3 pairs of eyes. She has the snow globe with her parents trapped. Technically, she completed the game, but the beldam is not going to fulfill the agreement. She never had any intention of fulfilling it. The arrogance that made her accept the challenge is the same. Arrogance that makes her believe she can simply change the rules when the situation isn't going as she planned. She takes the snow globe from Coraline's hands. She says the parents are staying, that Coraline is staying, that the game was an illusion of choice, as everything in the other world always was, an illusion built by the beldam. For the beldam, with the result determined before the start, and then the final confrontation begins. But not the way you expect. It's not a physical battle. Coraline is an 11-year-old child. The beldam, when she completely abandons the disguise of her human mother, is something that has no fixed size. She stretches, she contorts, her fingers become articulated claws, her face loses any pretense of humanity. Fighting her with brute force would be absurd, so Coraline doesn't fight that way. She deceives, with the cat as an accomplice. Coraline provokes the beldam in a specific and calculated way. She uses the right words, in the right tone, to trigger the creature's arrogance. The beldam, convinced of her superiority, opens a window, an opening in the fabric of the other world to show where Coraline's parents are trapped. And at that exact moment of distraction, the cat attacks. Not the beldam, but her button. Eyes, scratching and disturbing those focal points from which all her perception operates. The distraction lasts seconds. It's enough. Coraline throws the snow globe through the window, the beldam opened back into the real world. The parents are released from limbo and wake up in the real kitchen, with no memory of anything, just a vague feeling that something strange happened. Coraline escapes through the tunnel before the beldam can recompose herself, but the beldam's armed that hand with long claws reaches through the door behind her. Coraline pushes the door with all the strength she has. The hand gets stuck. And in a scene that balances horror and determination in a way very few children's films dare, Coraline takes the key and locks the beldam's door from the outside, cutting off the creature's hand, which falls into the real-world hallway. As something dead, immobile, now without power, she threw the key into the garden well. The door is locked. And at least it seems it's over. But it's not over, because the hand is still there. Separated from the beldam, but still with the residual intelligence of a creature that spent centuries perfecting the hunt. The hand crawls. It searches for the key. It almost reaches it inside the well. It is here that Wybie appears. Wybie, who had been warned by his grandmother, the owner of the Pink Palace, who lost her own twin sister to the beldam. Decades ago arrives on his bicycle at the exact moment. He sees the situation. He understands without needing an explanation. He takes a stone and destroys the beldam's hand before it reaches the key at the bottom of the well. The hand disintegrates. The threat ends, and the three ghost children, now released from limbo with their eyes returned, appear one last time. Translucent but somehow more present than before, as if the liberation had given them back some substance. They look at Coraline. There are no words. There is just the recognition of two children who went through something too difficult to fit into languid, one who saved and three who were saved, and then they simply go away. Where does a ghost child go when it is finally free? The film doesn't answer. It doesn't need to. The real garden blooms shortly after. Not in a magical or instantaneous way, but the next day, Mel Jones finally decides to work in the garden, and for the first time in the entire film, she asks for Coraline's opinion. She asks what her daughter thinks should grow where. She listens to the answer. She plants accordingly. It's a small scene, 2 minutes, maybe less. No special effects, no grandiloquent music, just a mother and a daughter in the garden together, working in the same direction, each seen by the other, It's the most moving scene in the film, because what Coraline went to seek in the other world to be seen, to be central, to be loved without needing to prove anything she didn't find there. She found it here, in this banal, real, and imperfect moment, with mud on her hands and the Oregon sky still half overcast. The beldam promised everything and delivered nothing real. The real mother promised nothing and delivered something that lasts. But the film doesn't let this ending be completely comforting. On the last night, Coraline dreams. The ghost children appear one last time, not as threatening figures, but with a warning. The hallway door is locked. The key is in the well, but the beldam still exists somewhere. Creatures of this type do not die of locks and stones. They weaken. They retreat. They wait. The children's message is simple. Plant flowers over the well. Cover the entrance. Not as magical protection, but as a conscious gesture of presence, like affirming that this garden belongs to people who are here. Alive, attentive. Coraline wakes up. She goes to the garden. She starts planting, and the film ends with her there, on her knees in the real earth, with her parents around her, with YB passing by on his bike and giving that clumsy wave that is all the social communication he can manage, with the cat watching from atop a wall with that expression of someone who knows more than they say, and decided, for today, not to say anything, with Coraline in the garden, with her eyes open. Her own eyes. An animated film is, among other things, an exercise in blind trust. The viewer doesn't see the actors. They don't see real expressions, real body language, real physical presence. They see resin and clay puppets moving frame by frame. The only direct bridge between human emotion and what appears on the screen is the voice and in Coraline. Every casting choice is so precise, it seems inevitable in retrospect, even being anything but obvious on paper. Dakota Fanning was 13 years old when she recorded the role of Coraline. This matters much more than it seems. There is a problematic tradition in Hollywood of using adults to voice children in animation. Sometimes it works, but frequently the result has a slightly artificial quality, like a person imitating childhood, instead of inhabiting it. With Fanning, that distance doesn't exist. Coraline's impatience is genuine. Her frustration with adults has the real texture of someone still inside that experience, not recalling it from the outside. But what surprises is the range Fanning delivers in a role that requires very distinct registers. Coraline complains and demands with a conviction that could easily make her annoying indeed. There are critics who found her so, but Fanning always maintains a spark of vulnerability beneath the stubbornness. When Coraline is afraid, her voice breaks in a way that doesn't seem calculated. When she is determined, the firmness is the same firmness of a child who learned early to trust herself more than the adults around her. And when she meets the ghost children and hears their stories, there is a quietness in Fanning's performance that is unexpected and completely correct. The silence of someone listening and understanding something that changes everything. Teri Hatcher does what is perhaps the most technically difficult dubbing job in the film. Two characters who inhabit the same vocal body but need to be recognizable as completely distinct entities. Mel Jones, the real mother, has that specific fatigue of someone who is overwhelmed and knows it but doesn't know how to change. There is love in her. It's a love buried under deadlines and stress and the accumulated weariness of a difficult move, but it's there. And Hatcher makes it present in the small cracks of the performance, in a tone of voice that softens for half a second before returning to impatience, in a dear that sounds automated but not cold. The other mother is eyed. The opposite, built with surgical precision. The other mother's voice starts almost identical to the real mother's, the same frequency, the same rhythm, but with everything amplified in the wrong direction. It is more melodious, more attentive, more enthusiastic, and it is exactly this calibrated excess that creates the first layer of disturbance. That voice is too sweet, too attentive, too perfect. Hatcher uses the two as a tool, adding a fraction of artificiality that grows with each scene until the final confrontation, when the beldam completely abandons the disguise and the voice becomes something that has nothing maternal about it, harsh, angular, with a mechanical quality that resonates with the spider-like appearance. The character has assumed it is an extraordinary performance for the format. Doubly extraordinary because most people don't stop to think about how difficult it is to make two vocally distinct characters without any of the visual tools that live-action cinema offers. Keith, David as the cat, is a chapter apart. There are actors who have voices that seem to have been sculpted specifically for a single role. Keith David's voice, deep purple as old velvet, with a quality that suggests simultaneously wisdom and irony without committing completely to either, is the voice of Coraline's cat with a precision that borders on the supernatural. Coraline's cat is a character who knows more than he says, and says only enough to be useful without ever being completely reliable. And David inhabits this ambiguity with an ease that seems spontaneous, but is actually the result of an actor deeply understanding what the character represents. There is a specific scene where the cat explains to Coraline why cats don't need names. It is a short monologue, delivered with that speed slightly higher than normal conversation that suggests the interlocutor knows the subject better than you and is being kind in explaining it. David does this without arrogance and without condescension, with the tranquility of someone for whom the information is just a fact. It is hilarious and disturbing at the same time, and it is one of the most perfectly executed moments of the whole film. Ian McShane, as Mr. Babinski, deserves more attention than he frequently receives. McShane is an actor of enormous presence, known for roles of villains and morally complex authority figures. And there is something delicious in what happens when this vocal presence is applied to an eccentric character with a Slavic accent, who trains jumping mice with absolute seriousness. McShane doesn't blink. He doesn't make Babinski a joke. He treats every absurd statement of the character with the gravity of a man who knows exactly what he is doing and considers any external skepticism a problem of the skeptic, not his. This makes Babinski simultaneously comic and genuinely strange. Laugh, but never completely at ease. Jennifer Saunders and Dawn French, as Mrs. Spink and Forcible, are a British comedy duo who have perfect vocal chemistry, not by accident, since the two worked together for decades in the British comedy universe. The two characters work almost as a unit, completing each other's sentences, existing in a bubble of mutual references that slightly excludes the rest of the world. In the real world, they are eccentric but kind, with that quality of older people, who are genuinely happy but whom the world around has stopped inviting to things. In the other world, they are the glamorized and impossible version of themselves, athletic, applauded. Saunders and French navigate both registers with the ease of someone who knows these characters inside out. John Hodgman, as the other father, deserves a specific mention for what he does with a character who is, in terms of the script, the least developed of the main adults. Coraline's real father is almost transparent, kind, present in intention but absent in execution. The kind of father you wouldn't know how to describe after 20 minutes because he never sufficiently filled the space around him. Hodgman makes this work. The voice is warm but without an anchor, like something floating slightly above the ground. In the other world, the other father is more present, more expressive, more there, but Hodgman maintains something unstable. Even in the improved version, a quality of something that is performing presence instead of having it. And when the other father is forced by the beldam to try to capture Coraline in the third act, Hodgman makes the scene work emotionally by letting it show through that the other father is suffering while executing the order that there is something in him that doesn't want to do this. That the beldam's order is overwriting something that could have been real. Robert Bailey Jr. as Wybie completes the cast with a performance that is, in many aspects, the most discreet of the film and, for that reason, the easiest to undervalue. Wybie is a character who could easily become just the comic relief or the convenient friend who exists to serve the protagonist. Bailey Jr. avoids this by giving the character a genuine shyness, a social difficulty that is not affectation but seems real, and a quality of someone who observes the world from a distance they learned to maintain because getting close, usually, results in some form of rejection. The other, Wybie, the one with the sewn mouth, eternally smiling by order of the Beldames, the version of Wybie someone would mold if they only wanted his presence without the inconvenience of his opinions. It is an elegant comment on what the beldam does to everything she touches. The complete cast of Coraline operates in a register that is rare in animated cinema. No one is doing a character. They are doing people. Imperfect, exaggerated in some cases, but fundamentally recognizable as beings who exist in a world with weight and consequence. And this quality combined with the physicality of the hand-built puppets, with the clothes knitted with needles of a fraction of a millimeter, is what makes Coraline feel not like an animation you watch, but like an experience you inhabit. For 100 minutes, when the credits roll, you step out of the film. Not from before it. What does Coraline really say? Not the story on the surface, the story of the girl and the door and the creature with button eyes. But what is the film saying beneath all that, and the layers that keep working inside you after? The credits have gone up. It starts with a question the film never asks out loud, but that is present in every scene of the first act. Why is it so difficult to feel loved by someone who clearly loves you? Mel Jones loves her daughter. That is not in dispute in the film. She is not cruel, not abusive, not indifferent in the profound way that causes permanent damage. She is overwhelmed. She is in a difficult moment of transition. She is trying to keep the family financially stable while settling in a new place. This kind of love real, but momentarily inaccessibly, is one of the most common of the human experience, and one of the least represented with honesty in children's cinema. Most movies for children solve this problem in one way. Either the father or the mother is a declared villain, or dies, or has some obvious and spectacular flaw that justifies the emotional distance of the protagonist child. Coraline doesn't. Do that. Coraline's parents are good people having a difficult week, and the film trusts that the child in the audience and the adult beside them, adults beside them, understands the difference between real love, temporarily blocked, and false love, permanently available. This trust is rare, and it is the base of everything. The film's color palette is not just an aesthetic choice. It is an elaborate and consistent system of visual language that Henry Selick and cinematographer Pete Kozacek built so the viewer understands. At an almost subconscious level, where they are and what that place means, blue dominates Coraline's real world. Blue in the skin tones, blue in the shadows, blue on the walls of the apartment, blue in the protagonist's own hair, which functions as a visual extension of her emotional state more than as a mere personal characteristic. The blue of the real world is not the beautiful blue of tropical seas. It is the blue of the fog early in the morning when no one has woken up yet. The blue of fluorescent office lighting. The blue of cold that does not invite you to stay. It is isolation with good. Lighting purple starts to appear when the other world enters the scene and grows in intensity with each visit. Purple is the color of supernatural seduction. It is present in the flowers of the other mother's garden, in the beldam's dress, in the warmer shadows of the other world. In many visual traditions, purple is the color of royalty and mystery, but also of magic practiced in secret, of what cannot be fully seen in daylight. Selick uses this with awareness. The other world is literally a purple world, and as the beldam reveals her true nature, the purples get darker, colder, closer to. Black yellow is the color of false promise. It appears concentrated in the other world as lighting warming the scene artificially, creating a sense of welcoming that is actually visual propaganda. When the other world begins to deteriorate, the yellow goes away first. What remains is cold, and then there is red. Red appears strategically and economically, almost always associated with real and immediate danger. The beldam's robe in the final confrontation, the glow of the creature's eyes in the theater, the details of the traps Coraline must navigate. Where yellow is danger disguised as an invitation, red is danger that has finally stopped hiding. The doll Webby delivers at the beginning of the movie operates as a central visual motif with a richness that expands with each review. The first time it appears, it seems like just a strange coincidence, a doll with Coraline's face found in a box of old luggage. The second time you watch it, knowing what you know, every appearance of the doll is charged with a different tension. The doll was spying. The doll was the extension of the beldam's button eyes in the real world, collecting information, mapping tastes and vulnerabilities, helping to calibrate a trap world specific to that specific child. The doll is also what horror fiction scholars call the anxious double, a physical representation of what the child could become if they yielded. The buttons in place of the doll's eyes are the portable version of the fate the beldam plans for Coraline. Having it in the room, sleeping with it, is the beldam establishing a presence in Coraline's real world, even before meeting her personally. It is a level of predatory planning that only becomes fully visible when you already know the entire film. The key is the third visual motif, and perhaps the most laden with meaning. It appears in a banal scene hanging on a nail on the wall, handed over by the mother to open a walled-up door. And when the door has bricks on the other side, the key returns to the nail and you forget it. But the key never vanishes. It circulates. It appears when it shouldn't be there. The beldam ensures that the key is always within Coraline's reach, always available, always inviting. The key represents the ease of escapism. It is not difficult to enter the other world. The door is in the living room. The key is hanging on. The nail, the tunnel is not long. The ease is part of the project. Traps that require too much effort to enter don't work as well. The other world needs to seem like you got there by accident, by curiosity, by chance, not that you were led there, by a creature that spent months preparing to receive you. At the thematic core of the film exists an idea about the nature of true love versus transactional love that is more sophisticated than anything most adult-oriented films try to articulate. The Beldam offers unconditional love, but demands a definitive condition: the eyes. The real mother's love is conditional. In the pragmatic day-to-day sense, there are moments when it is not available, when deadlines win, when fatigue triumphs. But it does not demand that Coraline exchange her eyes for it. It does not demand that she'll become another person. It exists without contracts. And Coraline, throughout the film, learns the difference between the two things, not from a lesson taught by a wise adult, but through the direct experience of almost losing the imperfect love, trying to exchange it for a perfect one that did not exist. Coraline belongs to the tradition of European fairy tale, specifically to the lineage of stories that Bruno Bettel analyzed in the uses of enchantment, where the scariest fairy tales are also the most psychologically useful for children because they externalize internal fears into concrete and navigable forms. The Beldam is not just a monster. She is the ghostly version of everything Coraline fears will happen if no one loves her. The confrontation with her is, simultaneously, a confrontation with that fear. The Gothic element is built with visual references that adults recognize and children absorb without necessarily naming. The Pink Palace has the architecture and atmosphere of a Victorian mansion in Decapherkind, of place that appears in British ghost stories. The Beldam, in her true form, is the spider of threads and bones that is at the base of witch and sorceress figures that appear in cultures around the world. The other world that deteriorates when its creator loses control is the trope of the enchanted castle that crumbles when the magic is broken. But Selick doesn't use these elements as decoration. He uses them as structure, as the foundation upon which he builds something that has its own rules and its own internal logic. Coraline is not a generic fairy tale. It is a specific fairy tale for children of the 21st century, who grow up in a world with more distractions and more promises of digital perfection than any previous generation. This specificity is what makes the film last. Not the visual beauty, not the stop-motion technique, not Teri Hatcher's voice or Keith David's moments. What makes Coraline last is that it speaks of something that doesn't age, the desire to be completely seen, completely loved, without cost, and without conditioning the slow and necessary discovery that this kind of love does not exist, that real love has imperfections, and that the imperfections are precisely what make it real. Coraline plants flowers over the well, not because the threat has ended completely, but because she decided that this garden, with this earth and these imperfect people, is the place where she wants to be, and that, basically, is the bravest thing any character in any movie could do. Before talking about what the film achieved in the world at the box office, at award ceremonies, in culture, it is necessary to talk about what you hear while watching Coraline. Because the soundtrack is a complete sonic argument, parallel to the visual argument, and the two things together create something that separately would not exist. Bruno Coulet is a French composer who before Coraline had signed the scores of Microcosmos and Winged Migration, nature documentaries that require music capable of creating transcendence without conventional narrative. Music that exists in the space between what you see and what you feel about what you see. Selick discovered Coulé's work exactly through these films. And when he began assembling animatic sequences for Coraline, he realized that Coulé's compositions had the specific quality he was looking for. They were beautiful and disturbing, at the same time, without one quality cancelling the other. Coulé worked on the project for over a year. He recorded in Paris with the Children's Choir of Nice, in Budapest with the Hungarian Symphony Orchestra, and mixed in Los Angeles at Skywalker Sound. He used harp, strings with glissandis and microtonalities, ethnic instruments, synthesizers, and something called a waterphoner, metal instrument with rods that produces sounds that seem alive in an organic and at the same time completely alien way. Much used in horror cinema to create subliminal discomfort without explicitly telegraphing the danger. Coulé's central idea for the soundtrack was described by him in a way that perfectly captures what the whole film tries to do. The music starts quiet, almost realistic, anchored in Coraline's daily world, and it becomes progressively scarier, not suddenly, but through slow accumulation, like the temperature of a room that is rising degree by degree without you noticing until suddenly you are sweating. The children's choir is the heart of the soundtrack. Children singing in a language that doesn't exist. It's not French, not English, not Latin. It is a language invented by Coulé specifically for the film, with sonorities that evoke old lullabies. Without belonging to any specific tradition, the result is a sound that the brain recognizes as familiar but cannot identify exactly, the sensation of the uncanny valley that the entire film is pursuing. You've heard this before, but where? When? The answer is that you haven't, but the sound was built to seem like you had. There is also a song that the other father sings to Coraline in a scene that is funny, charming, and slightly wrong in equal measures. The Other Father song, written and performed by John Linnell, co-founder of They Might Be Giants. The band had been hired to contribute several original songs to the film, but during production, it became clear that their material, as good as it was, pushed the other world into a comedy register that took away the disturbing edge. Most of their contributions were cut. Only this song remained short, irresistible, perfectly bothersome. The soundtrack won the Annie Award for Best Music in an Animated Feature Production in 2010. It is one of the film's few awards, and it is completely deserved. But Coraline's history at award ceremonies is longer and more interesting than just this trophy. The film was nominated for the Oscar for Best Animated Feature at the 82nd Academy Awards ceremony, competing with Fantastic Mr. Fox by Wes Anderson, The Princess and the Frog by Disney, The Secret of Kells, and the Pixar film Up by Pete Docter, which was the one that took the prize that year. Up was from 2009, an extraordinarily strong year for animation. Coraline was nominated but did not win. It also received a Golden Globe nomination for Best Animated Feature and a BAFTA in the same category. In all cases, it lost to Up, which says more about the exceptional strength of Up in that specific year than about any weakness of Coraline. There are critics who argue that in a year without Up, Coraline would have taken the Oscar. It is impossible to know. But what is possible to say is that the two films are completely different in intention and execution. Up is about adult grief and adventure. Coraline is about childhood, fear, and identity, and that comparing them never made much sense beyond the coincidence of having been released in the same year. At the box office, Coraline's story is one of unlikely victory. The film was released on February 6, 2009. On the American Valentine's Day weekend, a strategic choice that recognized that the film's audience was not just children, but teenagers and adults who would go to the movies in pairs or groups. The production budget was $60 million, not counting marketing. The opening weekend grossed $16.85 million in North America alone, a solid but not spectacular results for the size of the investment. In total, the film grossed $124.6 million worldwide. For a debut stop-motion film from a new studio with a female protagonist, based on a dark story that no major studio had wanted to touch, this was extraordinary. It wasn't the blockbuster that Pixar or DreamWorks routinely produced, but it was enough more than enough to prove that the market was wrong when it said there was no audience for it. And then came 2024. On the film's 15th anniversary, Fathom Events organized a theatrical re-release. No one knew what to expect. Re-releases of animated films have a mixed record. Some work, many go unnoticed. What happened with Coraline was different in scale. The re-release debuted on the weekend of August 15th, 2024, and opened with $20.2 million in 4 days more than $12.5 million in North America alone and $7.6 million in international markets. The film ranked 5th in the global box office that weekend. What explains this phenomenon? Leica spent 5 years building a presence on social media, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, without releasing a new film. Feeding the public with behind-the-scenes content, production details, close-ups of puppets and sets that went viral with a regularity that any studio with a new release on the shelf would envy. The generation that was between 6 and 12 years old in 2009 was between 21 and 26. In 2020, for an age group totally willing to go to the movies to relive a film that shaped their childhood, and completely active on the platforms. Where Leica was cultivating this community, it was nostalgia with a fan base that had grown up and could now pay for the ticket alone and go in groups and make videos about the experience that fed the algorithm and brought more people. The original critical reception of Coraline was very positive. The film has a 91% on Rotten Tomatoes, with a consensus centered exactly on what we discussed throughout these parts. The extraordinary visual beauty, the thematic courage to make a dark fantasy film that does not underestimate children or adults, and the technical performance without precedent in stop motion. Roger Ebert, in one of his last reviews of an animated film before his death in 2013, gave it 4 stars and described Coraline as a true work of imagination, not the kind of animation that simply reproduces a familiar visual style, but one that creates a world that did not exist before it was filmed. 15 years after the original release, where is Coraline? It is everywhere. It is on TikTok, where scenes and production details continue to generate videos with tens of millions of views. It is in film schools, studied in subjects of visual language and nonlinear narrative. It is on the shelves of collectors who pay for replicas of puppets and original posters. It is in the cultural studies programs of American universities that analyze representations of the feminine in fantasy cinema. It is, above all, in the effective memory of an entire generation that grew up knowing that animated films could make you feel real fear, real melancholy, real courage. Henry Selick, in a 2024 interview celebrating the film's 15th anniversary, said that the reception of the re-release was moving in a way that the original debut was not. Because in 2009, The audience that showed up were children and their parents. In 2024, it was those same children, now adults, coming back on their own. Coming back because they wanted to. Because the film had stayed inside them. This is what separates the films that last from the films that pass. Coraline never promised to be the happiest film, the easiest, the most comforting. It promised to be honest. It promised that an 11-year-old girl with blue hair and stubborn determination could look directly at childhood's deepest fear of not being truly loved and come out the other side, not unscathed, but alive. Not the same, but more. Herself. Those who saw Coraline in 2009 and returned for the re-release in 2024 didn't return to relive childhood. They returned because the film respects them now, the same way it respected them then, with the conviction that a good story doesn't need the protection of quotes or an adult content warning to work inside you. Plant flowers over the well, cover the entrance, and once in a while, on a day when the world seems grey and numbing, open a small door and let a good story do what good stories do. Coraline will be there.